Hello, and welcome to Leadership as a Philosophy, Not a Checklist, case study number 5, Old Karl. I love telling this story. So, what's the scenario? So the scenario, some medium-sized construction company. They do general construction, worked on specific buildings, did basically a lot of general contracting around this major city. And they were kind of the top company in the city. Not a bad thing at all. So Karl, middle-aged guy in his, middle-aged, early 40s, he was the best welder that anybody knew of. So the thing about Karl was he knew how to do all the different type of welds. He could do a bunch of different joints. He could work with any sort of metal. However, Karl was a little rough around the edges. He's a little bit of a curmudgeon, set in his ways, liked doing things his own way. But he was so good that people were delighted and sought this company out specifically so that they could have his quality of work because he was really, really excellent. Other companies that were doing construction jobs, if the main company didn't get any work, would subcontract to them just for Karl. So he'd bring in $2.5 to $3 million a year in extra revenue because he was so good. Right? Sounds like a great story. Karl sort of was a mentor to people. People would go follow him around and work with him and stuff. He kind of liked to work by himself, but made the company lots of money. They got lots of jobs because of Karl. They got extra contracting work because of Karl. It was all great. So Karl had an old truck that died, and he decided he wanted to buy a new one. So he went to the company and said, "Hey, can I get a pay raise?" And they said, "Nope. You are maxed out for your pay scale, so you have to go into management." Karl says, "I don't want to be management. I want to weld. I'm the best welder that there is." Okay. Well, he didn't say that, but he was a great welder. He says, "I don't want to be management." They said, "Well, there's no other way." He said, "We'll give you a 10% pay raise, 15% if you go to our management school and then become a manager." So they went back and forth, and Karl just didn't want to do it. They kept on forcing him. Finally, they forced him to do it. Okay. Well, after much wrangling, he was moved to management. And as I said, Karl's a little rough around the edges. He's not an office type. He wasn't the sort of guy to like being indoors dealing with bureaucrats and dealing with paperwork and dealing with forms and dealing with scheduling. He just wanted to weld. So he started rubbing people the wrong way. He a little rough around the edges, like I said, wasn't used to the office culture, and so made some people grouchy. So then, because Karl wasn't on the projects anymore, they lost all that $2.3 million, $2.5 to $3 million in extra stuff because Karl wasn't welding anymore. Nobody else on the team was good enough, was at his skill level, and so they started losing business because Karl wasn't going to be available. So people would find out that Karl wasn't working there. They started going to the competition. And then projects, because again, no skill, over time, over budget, bunch of things started to fail because Karl was no longer working as a welder. And because he didn't fix that, he couldn't get a handle on the scheduling, he couldn't do any of these other things, they let Karl go because he wasn't a good manager. So Karl was then hired by the competition, given a 20% pay raise over what he was making before, and the new company that he hired soon outpaced the old company. Okay, so that's the scenario. So what was the impact? So how was the employee experience in this situation? So Karl's experience was terrible. All he wanted to do was weld. All he wanted to do was do his job and get rewarded for it because he knew that he was making the company all this extra money. So, hey, they gave me a little bit extra money. So his experience was bad because he was forced to do something he didn't want to do and probably didn't know that he was going to be bad at, but he knew he wasn't an office guy. So what was the customer experience? Well, every job that got hired after that didn't have Karl on it was bad, was delayed, was done, had to be redone. And so customer experience was bad. And then what was management's experience? Well, we don't know because management acted like it was Karl's fault. right? So what was the impact of management's decision? Well, they lost all that external business. They got a bad reputation because they were suddenly none of their stuff was being done to standard. They lost all of that revenue, the $2.5 to $3 million in revenue, plus revenue for jobs that they were going to lose because Karl wasn't working on them. So then the competition hired Karl, took all that business, took all that extra money, and next thing you know, they were the go-to company in the town. So what was the character of management, right? That's why we always ask that question in these case studies. What was the value of management? Well, they enforced their processes. So they're absolved of all blame, right? You sure? Because they followed the company rules. All right. So did they have any integrity? Maybe, I guess, because they were following the process. Did they have humility? No. They didn't have any humility because they didn't even take into consideration that maybe their process was stupid, right? Maybe they had a dumb system. They didn't even enter into their mind. What was their empathy? They didn't have any empathy either. Because Karl, you should be able to tell if somebody who's rough around the edges and is the best welder in existence, he's not going to be very good at being an office person. He's just not. That wasn't his competency. And then were they paying attention to anything? No, you couldn't see that this was going to happen. You know, most of you watching this video probably figured out that what was going to happen within a minute of what I was talking about. So were they paying attention to anything? No. So they were useless, right? They caused all of this problem. The management, the people in charge, none of those people were leaders, because what would a leader do? A leader would say, hey, guess what? Let's give Karl a pay raise. I had somebody that worked for me once that was absolutely the best at her job. And the way that the company was structured, it's almost a similar story. The way the company was structured, I couldn't pay her any more money unless she went to management. She was not a manager under any circumstance. And I asked her every time, are you going to be able to do this if you get promoted? She said, no. I said, well, that's what we need. Now, eventually I was able to wrangle and get some stuff done to give her more money, but she was making the absolute cap for her job thing. She couldn't pay her another cent, but she deserved more. So I went and got her more money. It's fine. But that's what a leader does, right? Instead of saying, well, let me just force you into management so then you get a pay raise and then it's a disaster. And nothing against her. She just wasn't a leadership type. She wasn't a person to be in charge of people. So here's a question for everybody. Is this an example of the Peter Principle? I apologize, my eye's itching. So the Peter Principle is you will eventually get promoted to your level of incompetence. Okay, well, Karl was already at the top of the competence hierarchy in the whole region. He was the best person for the job anywhere that anybody could think of. So did we promote him to his level of incompetence? Or did we take him out of his competency and put him into a place that we should have known he didn't have competency in? See, I think the Peter Principle is wrong. I think that you should know what somebody's capabilities are and you should know what their potential are. And if you're actually a leader, then you're going to put that person in a place that matches their skill set. So it's the leadership's fault if you put somebody in a position where they're incompetent. You should know whether or not they're going to be competent for that spot. Competency. That's why this is linked to the competency. It's also going to be linked to the hierarchy because the leadership wasn't paying attention to anything. That'll be the next chapter. Anyway, there you go. And then identify some of the issues and possible corrections. Well, these are simple. We know these, right? Observation. Were the leaders paying attention? Nope. Were the leaders? Were the managers paying attention? Absolutely not. They weren't observing anything. Training of other employees. What if they had gone to Karl and said, look, we'll give you a pay raise. We'll give you 25%. But you're going to have to spend 1 day a week, or we're going to give you some of these smaller jobs that normally we don't give you, and you're going to take along a couple of apprentices and coach them and teach them how to do it. Even though they've got the certificates and all that sort of stuff, you're going to train our guys to make them better. So you're going to get some more money, but you're going to have a little bit more responsibility. Still not management, still not leadership. You're still welding. Just need you to teach some people because we can't have you be, 200% better than the next best person on the team. We need to close that gap. Because what is that? That's attuning the competence and the environmental hierarchies in pursuit of a goal. want to get everybody as competent as possible. I mean, obviously the guys that are welding have done their welding training. But if Karl was so much better, what would happen if we had 2 more Karls? We get $2 or $3 million more dollars. I mean, it's easy, right? It's makes sense. And then production costs. Why did I put production costs in here? You know what that is? That's an artifact from an old slide. So let's ignore production costs. Yeah. So you should have been doing the training of other people. You know, make everybody in your company half as good as him instead of 25% as good. Anyway, so that's the case study. So this is what happens. So you got somebody who's got the competency. He's a welder. You're putting him in a place where he does not have the competency, even though he went to the company's leadership management training garbage. He wasn't the guy for the office. He should never have been put in that position. You should be able to pay somebody more money. If they're the best in the region, keep them, because they're going to make you all this money. All right, I babble. So about 10 minutes. I know it's longer, but it's a case study. Hope you have a great day, and thanks so much for your time.